had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience, and then highlight the top two lines as well. Following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. Okay, so off to the left, we're going to write Ebby Thacher. Okay, so Ebby Thacher was the alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. By the way, I guess, well, we'll cover it in Bill's story, but when Ebby Thacher went over to help Bill Wilson, Bill was drunk. Which, when you're trying to 12-step somebody, it's not a good idea. It's better if they're maybe on day 2 or something with a tremendous hangover. I've found that when people are drunk, they don't retain a whole lot. I know I didn't. He had been also greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth. Okay, there's our doctor again, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. Highlight the next sentence. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Highlight that line, and off to the left write medical diagnosis. Medical diagnosis. So basically, in the summer of 1933, Bill went into the town's hospital in New York City, and Dr. Silkworth removed him from alcohol. And of course, everybody, Bill, you got low willpower, you got no willpower, you're sinful, your morals are horrible. Bill, why can't you do it? That's what everybody was telling Bill. And Dr. Silkworth all of a sudden says, he said, Bill, your drinking is not due to poor moral character. It's not due to weak willpower, nor is it sinful. He said, you have developed a physical allergy to alcohol. Bill, if you put alcohol in your body, you trigger the phenomenon of craving, and your body wants more alcohol, and it's impossible for you to stop. Right? Dr. Silkworth also, he said, you can never safely drink alcohol again. Right? And then he went on to tell Bill, he said, Bill, when you're sober, the obsession of the mind takes over, and it does not matter how badly you want to stop drinking. He said, from time to time, the obsession of the mind is going to overcome all ideas to the contrary and tell you it's okay to take that first drink. And then once you take that drink, you can't control what you take, and you're going to get drunk. Right? So because of your mind, you can't not drink. Because of your body, you can't safely drink. You are absolutely powerless. So Bill got the medical diagnosis for the first time. So a little later on, when Ebby Thacher went over, this is after 2 more drying outs, or 1 more, Ebby Thacher went over to Bill's house, and Ebby Thacher said, Bill, doctors, ministers, psychiatrists, none of these people can help you, Bill, because they're human power, right? Ebby Thacher said, Bill, you need a power greater than human power. He said, Bill, I now belong to a group called the Oxford Groupers, and they have given me a practical program of action that they guarantee if I do it, that I'm going to find that power to overcome my obsession to drink. So basically, Bill now has 3 pieces of information. He got what the problem was from Dr. Silkworth. He got the solution from Ebby Thacher, which was a vital spiritual experience. And he also got the practical program of action from Ebby Thacher. Now, all through this book, the way Bill writes, he's going to lay it out over and over again. He's going to give us the problem, he's going to give us the solution, and he's going to give us the practical program of action to implement that solution. We're going to see it over and over. Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now counted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next page. Sorry about that. Alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory. Above moral inventory, write step 4. Confession of personality defects, above that, write 5. Restitution to those harmed, above that, write 9. Helpfulness to others, above that, write 12. and the necessity of and belief in and dependence upon God. After God, write 2, 3, and 11. Prior to his journey to Akron, highlight the next 4 lines. The broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. So off to the left, we're going to write, if you help other alcoholics, you will stay sober. If you help other alcoholics, you will stay sober. And I see a lot of old-timers that they do help other people, right? These guys, I see a lot of people, they went from step 1 to step 12, right? So when I look at them, I still see that anxiety, that depression, that worry, that fear, that angst. But I see people that can get long-term sobriety by going to a lot of meetings and by trying to help other people. But my heart just breaks because they're missing the happy, joyous, and free part that we get when we do all of the steps. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. Highlight to the end of the paragraph. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must, carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. So after that, you can write Dr. Bob Smith. Dr. Bob Smith. Now, it won't keep you sober, but off to the left, you can write National Rubber Machine Company. Bill went to Akron in a proxy fight for that company, the National Rubber Machine Company. It's kind of cool. You can look up history when you read history about the early days, and you see these names and recognize them. It's kind of cool. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when his broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual, underline spiritual, remedy for his malady, underline malady, with a willingness, underline willingness, he had never before been able to muster. Okay, so off to the left, we're going to write sickness. Dr. Bob was already a member of the Oxford group, and he knew the solution and he knew the program of action, but because he did not know what the problem was, he had been unable to recover. He had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. At the bottom of the page, let's write June 10th, 35. June 10th, 35. That's Dr. Bob's sober date. It's also AA's birthday. June 10th, 35. AA birthday, Dr. Bob's sober date. And you can write 12 stepping in 10 days. So Dr. Bob went out within 10 days to try to help others. June 10th, 35. 12 stepping in 10 days. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no alcoholic could. Highlight the next 2 lines. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. So highlight that. And after recovery, write life and death. Life and death deal. I have never seen so many people die in my life since I've been coming to these meetings and opening my eyes these last 5.5 years. I mean, people their car crashes, liver failure, hanging themselves. I mean, it's crazy. We sit here in this nice fancy club, but it doesn't matter. This is a life and death deal, and people are dying all over the place, all over the place. So after life and death deal, write no half measures. No half measures. I remember, when I was 14 years old and my mom found a bag of weed in my pants pocket when she was going to wash it, and she gave me that weed back. She said, I know it's not going to help to take this from you, but she looked at me and she said, I just want you to know that your next high could be your last. Right? You could die. And boy, was my mom, of course I didn't listen. No half measure. Highlight the next sentence. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Just that little line. Let's see if I got everything. Oh, so you all know the story about Bill Wilson. He goes to Akron, and the business venture failed. Everybody left town. Bill didn't have any money in his pocket, and he's walking up and down the Mayflower Hotel, the lobby. On one side over there is the bar, right? There's gay chatter, there's soft music, the sound of ice tinkling in glasses, and rising smoke, and Bill is looking in there, he's going, my God, I should go in there and talk with some people like me. Maybe I can scrape up an acquaintance and get some money. Right? On the other side of that hall, there's a phone booth, right? So Bill's sitting there, which way do I go? I'm glad that wasn't me. Bill went over to that phone, and he had the name and phone number of somebody that had been given to him by somebody in New York, and he started dialing. He got the guy, and he gave him 10 names. And Bill called these 10 names, and nobody was home, or they hung up on him. And the 10th one, he said, hey man, I'm an alcoholic from New York, and I've got a possible cure for alcoholism. Do you know anybody I can help? Anybody I can work with? And the 10th guy gave him another number to a woman called Henrietta Seiberling. She was a wealthy, non-alcoholic woman, and he got Henrietta Seiberling on the phone. And can you imagine? She picks up the phone, and the guy says, I'm a drunk from New York. Do you know anybody I can talk to? I might have a cure for alcoholism. She was a wealthy heiress, right? You think they would have hung up. But she knew Dr. Bob, and they had been praying for Dr. Bob for the last 2 years that something would happen. So when she picked up that phone, and this crazy guy from New York said, I'm a stockbroker from New York, and I might have a cure, she said, my goodness, God has answered my prayers. And she said, yes, I know a fellow. It's Dr. Bob. And so she called Dr. Bob, and it happened to be Mother's Day, but Dr. Bob was drunk under the table, so he couldn't go out to meet him. But the next day, Dr. Bob went out to Henrietta Seiberling's guest house and agreed to meet with Bill Wilson for 15 minutes. He didn't want to go. And when he got there, they went into a room, and they talked for hours. Dr. Bob thought that Bill was going to say, you're drinking, you, this, that, but he didn't do that. Bill talked about Bill Wilson's drinking, and Dr. Bob said, my God, I've never heard anybody who understands what's going on with me. So early on, Bill discovered the importance of identification in this program, and that's why we do that through the sharing of our stories, so people don't think that they're unique. I used to think nobody was like me when I came into these rooms, right? But everybody's like me. So they talked, and of course, Bill didn't have a penny to his name. And Dr. Bob said, would you mind coming over and staying at my house for a few weeks so we can talk more? And of course, Bill said, well, I'll check my schedule. Yes, I can do that. He was broke, didn't have any money. And they started working together. So their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. Underline AA number 3 and write Bill Dotson. Off to the right, Bill Dotson, lawyer. June 20th, 1935. June 20th, 1935. So there's that 10-day difference. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, underline just that one line, the first AA group had actually been formed. So you can write King School Group. King School Group. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron and New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. Underline these just three words. By late 1937, just those 3 words, the number of members having, underlined, substantial sobriety. So we have by late 1937 and substantial sobriety, underlined. You can write 2.5 years. 2.5 years. That was unheard of. No alcoholics throughout history. 2.5 years sobriety, absolutely unheard of. time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. Right? They're saying, my God, we might actually have something here. So there were, I think it was in 1937, they had what you could call the first group conscience meeting, and it took place in Akron. And I think there were about 18 members, some of them non-alcoholics. And they said, hey, this message of ours, when it's going from mouth to mouth, it's becoming garbled, and it's changing, right? I think, but what we've got to do is put this down in a book so that it's going to be around for posterity, because people are already, they're missing half of the stuff and they're getting the other stuff wrong. So they decided that they were going to write a book. Now they also decided two other things at that group conscious meeting. They decided that they were going to take the profits from the book and they were going to open a string of hospitals across the United States. Never mind that this was in the middle of the Depression and nobody had two nickels to rub together. Bill Wilson, we're going to open a string of hospitals and we're going to hire an army of missionaries to go out and bring these suffering alcoholics into the hospital where they can get detoxed and then they can do the program, right? So they decided to do all of that with the profits of the book. Now, the book didn't sell very well, so of course they couldn't even pay their own bills. But they did decide to write the book. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. Some of the other book names, and you don't need to write this, but one of them was called The Way Out. They went to the Library of Congress and saw there were a bunch of other books named that. Another one was Comes the Dawn. Another name they had was 100 Men, but then a woman joined. They couldn't call it 100 Men and a Woman. Bill suggested the Bill W. movement, but that got shot down. And they said, well, we're anonymous alcoholics. How about Alcoholics Anonymous? With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 18 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics, you can just write 800 alcoholics, you can just write that or highlight that, were on their way to recovery. And after recovery, we can write 4 years old. 4 years old. So this thing is starting to snowball. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Highlight the next 4 lines. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. So you can look that article up, the Jack Alexander article in the Saturday Evening Post. And this guy was he was a jaded reporter. He just got done writing about the corruption on the docks. With the unions and everything, and so he went to AA. He was gonna tell the truth about AA, how it was fake and it was another money-making scheme. And he traveled all over the world and was absolutely 100% convinced that this thing was unbelievably real and unbelievably doing great work for people. And when that article came out, that was the periodical of the day. AA started to go crazy. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. So off to the left, let's write 2218 First Avenue. 2218 First Avenue. You can write First Minnesotan, Pat Cronin. Cronin. So I'm sure some of you have been to that grand old mansion in downtown Minneapolis, 22 First Avenue. That is the longest continuously operating AA club in the world. There's meetings around the clock. It's a grand old mansion, rooms everywhere. Two guys came to Minnesota for the football game. I believe it was between Michigan and Minnesota for the Little Brown Jug. And they got trapped in Minnesota during the Armistice Day blizzard, November 11th and 12th, 1940. One of them reached in the pocket and said, well, hey, we got this guy's name, Pat Cronin, that wrote The Little Office in New York. They went in 12-step Pat Cronin, because they got trapped here. Pat Cronin sobered up. He opened up 2218 and started AA right here in Minneapolis. Right? So, unbelievable. Our society, underline that. And you can see that it's a capitalized, right? Capitalized as a deity again, our society. And again, it's okay for people to use these groups as their higher power. Again, for starters, that's okay. But I hope as we go through the work that's gonna change. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this. Could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? By the way, Bill Wilson, he's a stockbroker. He's a salesman, and he went to Rockefeller, and he was saying, my God, we're in like Flynn now. We're going to get all kinds of money from John D. Rockefeller. He's got this dinner planned for us. So he was already planning on all these things they were going to do. And John D. Rockefeller, who his only job was to give money away. That was his only job, right? He was an heir. That's all he did was give away money. It was a full-time job. He said, Bill, I'm sorry, but if I give you money, I think it's going to ruin this thing. So here, Dr. Bob's going to lose his house. Bill's going to get kicked out into the street. And the richest guy in the world said, I think money's going to hurt you guys, right? So needless to say, Bill was a little upset. But he did put a little bit of money in a bank so that Bill and Dr. Bob could draw something like $50 a week so that they could carry on with this work. But that was very prophetic by Rockefeller because, if we did have all kinds of money in here, that would have killed us, right? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. After pass off the scene, write traditions. Traditions. Okay, so those came along, and the 12 and 12 with the essays about the steps was Bill's way of forcing these traditions on the fellowship. Because without them, I believe that Bill thought correctly that we would have crumbled. As we discovered the principles, highlight the word principles, by which the individual alcoholic could live. Right? And that's another way of practicing the 12 steps. Each step has a principle. And when we work these, we try to live by these principles in our everyday life. And again, when you do that, if you're anything like me, you're going to discover that that's much harder than being a good guy 1 hour a day at an AA meeting. Alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous and there was to be no professional class of therapy, there were to be no fees or dues, our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions, there was to be the least possible organization, we're good at that, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided, highlight to the end of the paragraph, that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. After that last one, you can write 10, right? Tradition 10. And, the Oxford group, that Ebby Thatcher came, you don't need to write this, but they got involved in public controversies and they failed. Right? There was only one other time in human history, only once in all of human history, where there were large numbers of alcoholics who were able to stop drinking. And that was around Washington, D.C. in the mid-1840s. And it got up to be around 150,000 sober alcoholics, one alcoholic helping another. They were called the Washingtonians. And the Washingtonians, they said, my God, and they didn't have phones, they didn't have computers, right? They said, my God, we're so good at this, I bet we can do some other things. There was an election that was tearing the country apart, much like the one that we just had, and they got involved in it. They tried to go out and stop the selling of booze, and they got involved in some religious ideas. And within a year, they had crumbled, and nearly every one of the 150,000 members died drunk. So we do not do anything but carry the message to the still suffering alcoholics. It's said that the 12 steps keep us from suicide, and the 12 traditions keep us from homicide. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full. Highlight that, I'm sorry. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Right? It's important that we know the traditions as well. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they became so widely, highlight the next 3 lines, accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. Just that little bit there. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were 2 principal reasons. Underline or highlight 2 principal reasons. Here's the good stuff right here, man. Put a 1 in front of the large numbers. That's the first one. The 2 principal reasons. 1, large numbers of recoveries, and then put a 2 in front of and, or next to reunited homes, and reunited homes. So 2 things were happening. People were recovering from alcoholism and starting to have good lives, right? Low bottom drunks off the street, and all of a sudden they're going back to work, they're back with their families, right? And reunited homes. Nobody had ever seen this before. Okay, so we're going to highlight 2 for the next 5 lines. Very important. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Highlight that. So they're telling us, you know, funny enough, my sponsor, DJ, somehow when he was done reading that, he goes, guys, that's amazing. That's 87% of recovery. And I said, no, it's not. It's 75. But he thought it was 87%. But it is 75%. And I got to tell you, of the people that I have worked with one-on-one and done this, I have seen 100%. Of the people that I've worked with that have not done the work, right? They didn't want to do that 4-step. I don't need to go make amends to my ex-wife. You're crazy, right? Those guys, I don't know where they are. I hope they're okay, but I don't know. So next to that, to those lines we highlighted off to the left, we're going to write worked all 12 steps. Worked all 12 steps. And I'm going to say that everybody, here and now, today, who applies these steps and these principles to their lives can get a good life, a good sober life. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates, right? All of a sudden, you know, it's like you go to AA, right? And I mean, that people are still doing that for us today. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view. Highlight, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. Just that little bit there. So, you know what? I came in here and I the doctors don't know anything, those religious, but today, you know what? We can learn from anybody, and cooperation with these people is good for the suffering alcoholic, and it's good for us. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America, and in distant lands, the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly, yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer, highlight the last two lines, may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. Okay, so we're going to write a few things, and then we're just a few more pages. We're going to write cake mix theory. Cake mix theory, okay? So, if I buy a Betty Crocker cake mix, right, and I follow the instructions on the back of that box, this has been tested thousands and thousands, of times. If I follow it to the letter, I'm going to get exactly the same kind of cake that they have in the Betty Crocker test kitchens, right? But, I'm an alcoholic, so I look at that, well, 4 eggs, I think if I put in 6 eggs, it'll be a little fluffier. You know what, man, I like chocolate. I'm going to throw some chocolate chips in here. I'm going to throw in a half a cup of walnuts. I'm going to bake this thing at 400 for 45 minutes rather than 350 for an hour because I'm hungry, right? So what comes out of the oven is going to look like a cake, but it is not going to be that same kind of cake that you get if you follow the instructions to the letter. So that's what we're going to try to do here in this meeting, is we are going to try to follow the instructions of the program Alcoholics Anonymous, not what they tell us in treatment or not what they tell us in the fellowship. So cake mix theory, basic text equals sobriety and good life. Basic text equals sobriety and good life. We're going to write a little bit more. Meetings are for fellowship, and I'll repeat it. Steps are for recovery. Program of AA is working steps with people. That's what we're doing right here, right now. We're working the steps together, right? Cake mix theory, basic text equals sobriety and good life. Meetings are for fellowship. Steps are for recovery. Program of AA is working steps with people. Do what they did, you get what they got. Meetings are for fellowship, steps are for recovery. Program of AA is working steps with people. Do what they did, you get what they got. Meetings are for fellowship, steps are for recovery. Program of AA is working steps with people. Do what they did, you get what they got. All right, we're almost done. A couple more pages. Forward to the 3rd edition. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership among newer members. The proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of AAs surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. That's why we changed the stories in the back of the book, because this is a program of identification. And if every story was written by a 30 or 40-year-old white guy, people are not going to relate to that. So we've got to keep the stories current. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. Highlight the next sentence. The 12 steps that summarize the program, just that little line there. The 12 steps that summarize the program, highlight that, may be called La Dos Pasos in one country, Les Deux Étapes in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed, underline that word blazed, by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they're telling us right here that the 12 steps are just a summary of the program. Right? I mean, I see people, they look at those 12 steps and they say, my goodness, I'm going to work those 12 steps. They try to work them off the wall. There's no instructions. You look at those steps. If you work the steps off the wall, you get an off the wall program, right? The instructions for doing the work are in the book. They're in the book. And I know that we alcoholics do not like to follow instructions. Trust me, I didn't. But hopefully that's what they talk about, the gift of desperation. When we become desperate enough or miserable enough, we actually agree to follow instructions, right? In spite of the great increase in the size and span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Highlight to the end. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And that's what we do when we work one-on-one. That's what we do when we give testimony at meetings, at step and tradition meetings. That's what we do when we tell our stories. This fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off press in 2001 at the start of a new millennium. Since the third edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of a vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, underline, we are people who normally would not mix, just that little line, page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Highlight to the end of the paragraph, the end of the page. Like so many of AA's basic texts, these words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could ever have imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. So very prophetic. They had no idea this was going to happen. While our literature has preserved the integrity of AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in the new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. In any meeting anywhere, AA share their experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics, modem to modem or face to face. AA speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. So we're not done yet, but you can write stop week 1, stop week 1. Now the whole idea, guys, behind Code Blue, right? And this, and I didn't understand this. I didn't understand much of anything when I came in. The whole idea is that we go through and we do this work and we recover, right? And I'll never forget when he said, by the way, John, you've gone out and made 2 amends in step 9, so start raising your hand at meetings, right? I just started working these steps. I'd only been working them for 3 months, for 3.5 months. And I raised my hand and this fella said, hey, I need you to sponsor me. And I freaked out. I freaked out. I've not only been sober. I had not even done with the steps. I don't know what I'm doing. I called my sponsor. I yelled at him. I said, I'm going to kill this guy. And he laughed and he said, no, you're not. First of all, it's not up to you. And I said, well, I don't know what to do. He said, you know exactly what to do. You are going to take him through the book just like we did in Code Blue. He's going to be highlighting. He's going to be writing. You're going to do the steps just like we did. You're going to hear his 5th step and you're going to help him with 9th. If you have questions, you're going to call me. And he said, that's what you're going to do. He said, if he's in danger of drink, you can meet him once a week if you think he's stable. If he's not, you can go through these steps as quickly as you need to. And I think, I think a lot of times we got to get these people through steps as quickly as possible so that obsession to drink leaves, right? So that's what we do. And this is going to be a book on how to sponsor. So, the book was started in 1937. Bill was 3 years sober. There were 40 sober people. They finished it in 1939. Now there's 100 sober people, right? So this book, they sent it out to California. They sent the book out to Arkansas. People read the book. They did what it said. I tried and it didn't work for me, but people read it, they did it, and they recovered, right? They started groups out there. They started groups all over the place. And back in 1939, the program Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellowship Alcoholics Anonymous were one and the same. But all of a sudden now there's many, many, many more groups. And slowly, people started to realize the great power of the fellowship, right? That's people coming together and sharing a common problem. And they realized that they could stay sober just by going to meetings. That's something that the first 100 people didn't have, right? So the fellowship began to change from the program, right? And all of a sudden people are saying, well, in step 3, I'm not going to give all my life and will over to the care of God. Just the alcohol. You, God, take the alcohol. You leave the money and sex to me, right? I'm not going to tell everybody. I'm not going to tell somebody my whole story. I mean, God knows it. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to ask God to take away all my defects of character. There's too many of them that I like. I'm comfortable with it, right? I'm not going to go make amends to everybody. I mean, that's ridiculous. That guy probably forgot about me. So what happened is we turned this into a non-drinking society instead of a life-changing program. Right? So people, they stopped doing the work and they could stay sober by going to meetings. And then pretty soon we started to measure success by the number of days, weeks, months, or years we've gone without taking a drink rather than by the quality of our life. Right? Ridiculous. Even today. So what we are going to try to do here is we're going to try to do the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So let's let the fellowship support us. But if we do this work, we're going to have a life-changing experience, and the obsession to drink is going to be lifted, and we're going to get along better with everybody in our lives. We're going to get along better with ourselves. I don't know about you guys, but when I came in here, the voices in my head wouldn't shut up. They wouldn't shut up. I mean, morning, noon, and night. I'm up till midnight. I'm up till 3 in the morning thinking that son of a bitch, right? And then I'd wake up in the morning and the first thing, I'm going to get fired today. And it would not stop. That stuff goes away when we do the work, and that's what they talk about when you get happy, joyous, and free. And I'm a veteran of 9 treatments, right? And these treatment centers, they taught me a lot of stuff, but I somehow got through all 9 treatments not learning about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They taught me about dysfunctional families. They taught me about dysfunctional sex. They taught me about chemical dependency. None of this stuff is in the book, and it didn't work. They said, John, what's your drug of choice? And I said, well, alcohol and cocaine. But you know what? I didn't have a drug of choice. I had a drug of no choice. I didn't have any choice. They didn't tell me that. So these treatment centers are important, right? Because they're going to get people out of here. We're going to get them some sobriety. But the good treatment centers are the one that funnel people into AA. Because the treatment centers, treatment is discovery, but AA is recovery. And, thank God. I mean, if I wouldn't have discovered that, I'd probably be dead right now. So, sometimes I go to an AA meeting and I hear people talking about all this stuff, and the only way that it's an AA meeting is when they read the preamble and the steps. So, Bill saw this, and so he put out a pamphlet, right? And this pamphlet is Problems Other Than Alcohol. And one of the things that Bill says, he says, sobriety, freedom from alcohol through the teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. Groups have repeatedly tried other activities and they have always failed, right? So that's what we do when we go to AA meetings, is we teach and practice the 12 steps, right? To get freedom from alcohol and a better life. Next week, we're going to really in depth, we're going to find out what the problem is by reading the doctor's opinion. It's a crucial, vital piece of information. We end every meeting, again, if you're able to get on your knees, we end it with the third step prayer, which is on page 63 in the middle of the book. Page 63, third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Peace. Thanks, everybody.